Welcome all to this 1-hour event where we will have a look at a missing piece in Europe's industrial decarbonisation plan, namely the transport of CO2 to permanent storage. I am Per-Olof Granström from the Zero Emissions Platform, and we have an amazing panel of speakers with us here today. So we have Lina Nagell from Bellona Europe. We have Bruun from Northern Lights, Fred Selhorst from Victrol, and Winston Beck from Heidelberg Cement, and finally Beck from the Clean Air Task Force. We will listen to all the speakers first, and after that we will have a joint short Q&A sessions with the speakers. So please enter already now if you have questions that I can pick up later on for the speakers. So let's go on, and we will start with a short introduction. And first of all, a couple of words regarding the Zero Emissions Platform. So the Zero Emissions Platform is a European technology and innovation platform under the Commission's SET plan. We are advisors to the EU on the deployment of CCS and CCU. And we have a very broad member base, everything from oil and gas and industry to researchers, unions, and environmental NGOs. And the objectives are very clear. First of all, to determine and create the conditions that are necessary for us to reach European net zero by 2050. Also to demonstrate that we have to act now, that the implementation of CCS and the parts of CCU that is aimed for permanent storage at scale now is really, really essential to reach this goal. And finally, and the focus here today is to accelerate the deployment of large-scale CO2 transport and storage networks. So we have a very positive momentum in Europe regarding the CCS and CCU development. More than 50 market-ready projects, and market-ready here means that they will become operational before 2030. In the whole value chain, everything also including low carbon hydrogen and carbon dioxide removals. But it is really urgent to deploy. We have to make the technologies investable, and we have to scale up. And the Commission has also been very, very clear about this, looking at these zero and low carbon technologies. They have to be developed, they have to be tested at scale during this decade. But looking at the map on the right-hand side, you can see that it's very focused on Northwest Europe, and most of the storage is situated in the North Sea. It's not at all evenly distributed across Europe. So we have to find a way to enable the CO2 emitters across Europe to really reach safe and secure storage of CO2. That's crucial in order to make this happen. So we need a non-discriminatory, open access, cross-border European CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. And this infrastructure needs to include both pipeline transport and non-pipeline transport, such as ships, barge, trucks, and train. So also on the right-hand side, we have from ZEP just 2 weeks ago presented a report that highlights the importance of CO2 transport by ship. I recommend you to have a look at that report on our website. We have also presented the first steps on EU regulatory framework for CO2 transport, because there is no overarching regulatory framework for that set up in the EU. We are very happy with the revision of the 10E regulation, taking storage into account, but it's hugely important also to look into how to fund the non-pipeline transport through Europe, because that will be major, both regarding the starting point now and in general going forward, in order to make it possible to reach CO2 storage. And I would also like to highlight that the energy crisis, as we can see, that is over us, also further highlights the crucial need for CO2 infrastructure as a core part in the European energy system integration. This is a starting point for the discussion today, and with that, I would like to hand over to the next speaker. So we will listen to the importance of CO2 transport and storage to reach climate neutrality. And Lina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Per-Olof. I will then share my screen here. Very aware that I was just told by my brilliant colleague Rebecca, who is helping us with the tech support here today, how to do it. So let's see if, in fact, that works. Right, so this works well for everybody, I hope. Please, someone let me know if it does not work. So first of all, thank you very much, all of you who have come to this event today. As mentioned by Per-Olof, this event really wants to highlight the need for recognition of the full value chain of CCS, also including multiple transport modalities. And this, of course, is a continuation of the work that we have been doing together with both Cleaner Task Force and Zero Emissions Platform, and also speakers to this event, and I'm sure participants as well, on the 10E. Now, unfortunately, on the 10E, although it is a great step in the right direction, we only now have CO2 storage and pipeline recognition, but not multiple transport modalities. And with the ongoing revision of the 10T, we want to lift this topic a bit closer to the surface to really highlight its importance. But for us to have these conversations and to try to make the situation on the ground more visible for the industrial actors trying to reduce their emissions, we of course are dependent on the people showing up to our events. So thank you very much for the different stakeholders, industry, and also policymakers who are here today. So I will then go to the next slide. And of course, this is a topic that is quite timely. CCS is incredibly important to reach net zero by 2050. And this was also confirmed by the IPCC report, which was published this week, which I'm sure we will hear more about also from other speakers. So there is really no doubt about the importance of carbon capture and storage on the path to net zero by 2050. But we still face some substantial challenges when it comes to the scaling this to the necessary size to enable the significant emission reduction that we need. And some of these challenges take the shape of persisting market failures. This can be, for example, with the weakened carbon price. It can also be the sheer volatility of the carbon price in and of itself that contributes to increased perceived investor risk. Of course, with infrastructure such as pipeline and storage with long lead times, the investors in question need a certain level of stability that might not be present from the market itself. And here efforts from the EU in particular can really help contribute to reduce some of these investor risks. I think it's safe to say it will never remove the investor risks completely, but contributing on that path is very important. And another aspect here, which we see is very important, that can contribute to investor risk is inconsistent signaling from especially EU authorities. And this is something that, as I mentioned, very important strides have been made. We now have recognition for the full value chain of CCS, both in the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy and the EU ETS. And I'll move quickly to the next slide because I think that illustrates it quite well. This positive signaling effects are backed up for storage and pipeline infrastructure with both additional signaling effects by recognition through PCI status, administrative support and funding in the 10E. But as is evident from this illustration, that is not the case for multiple transport modalities, neither in the 10E or in the 10T. And this is something that is particularly problematic because multiple transport modalities is, as the title of this presentation is, the missing key to the puzzle. And this is because, of course, and here I'll move to the next slide. A transport and storage network for CCS develops in different phases. And though pipelines and storage are incredibly important and form the backbone of any such network, what really can get us to the finish line and scale up to the necessary size is multiple transport modalities. And here there are different aspects to cover, and I'm very happy that Per-Olof already covered some of them, and I apologize because I might repeat a little bit here. But of course, here we are talking a lot about the chicken and egg situation, because all of the different chains of the value chains are interconnected. So storage investments depend on expected capture, and capture, of course, depend on available storage and transport. For larger emitters, it might make sense to invest directly in pipelines, but for smaller emitters, it might be necessary, especially if they are, as mentioned by Per-Olof, in places far away from storage, to use multimodal transport to reach these storage sites. And this is also what can really justify the building of the pipeline in the long term if you see that there is interest and the market is proven in specific regions. So this is why multiple transport modalities is very important. And we also have to remember geographical constraints or difficulties related to terrain. There are some areas where pipeline simply is not the most cost-efficient solution, or maybe even not possible. We have, for example, been in conversation with industrial emitters in Sweden who are telling us that for them, with a long coastline and specific challenges related to terrain, ships are the most cost-efficient solution and the one that for them will be the most efficient. Barges will be very important when it comes to inland waterways and connecting them to either to clusters. And trucks are already in use in certain projects, which I think we will hear more about today, as well as rail, which is more, I think at this stage, looked more and more into, but we expect it to play a more important role in the future. We also have to think of equitable access, and this is what Per-Olof mentioned, that storage is not equally distributed across Europe. And if we really want to make this a just transition, we need to ensure this access to storage across all of Europe. And this is also where the importance of European cohesion comes into play here. Lastly, I want to just mention how multiple transport modalities also contribute to a very well-functioning market and counter monopolies. And this, of course, relates also to why we think it is so important that the 10T in particular acknowledges the role of multiple transport modalities. And I know that Clean Air Task Force will be talking more about 10T, so I'll just give you a little teaser. But what we are seeing when we see that, what we mean when we're saying that we really want the synergies between the 10E and the 10T to come forward, and we see this is very much being in the multiple transport modalities, is because when you have, for example, a project which is already being developed under the 10E, for example, for CO2 transport and storage and via pipeline, if we can make sure that there is also available support and funding for those projects to be compatible with multiple transport modalities, we can ensure that we are working against monopolistic tendencies, which in the long term will foster not only innovation, but also reduce the prices of the market. And this is really what will spark the flame of market development and make sure that we really get to the scale that is necessary. And with that, I think I have maybe, Per-Olof, I'm 1 minute over, but I will stop there and looking forward to your questions and all the rest of the presentations.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lina. Very, very clear. As we said before, please enter your questions you might have into the chat, and we will come back after all the presentations for a Q&A session. And with that, I would like to go to the next speaker, how CO2 shipping will expand the reach of CCS. Kim, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to this event. So I'm going to share my screen and make it. Well, can you see my screen all right now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So yeah, my name is Bruun. I work for the Northern Lights JV, which is the operator for the Northern Lights project, and I'm based in Stavanger. I'll quickly run through kind of some background information on who we are and what we're doing before I go into the shipping component. But here is an overview. We do transportation and storage of CO2, and we're building a receiving terminal as well. This is going to be a flexible ship-based transportation and permanent storage system for CO2, and we're ready for startup in 2024, and expect to sign first commercial contract now in 2022. Meaning in addition to the 2 initial customers, which are part of the Norwegian government-supported Longship project. We are building a receiving terminal in Øygarden, and this is what it's going to look like. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I'll move quickly to this picture, which shows what the receiving terminal looks like today. So we're well underway with the construction and preparation of the site, and civil works have been completed. Import jetty is more or less ready, and the project office and visitor center, as you see in the back there, will be opened in September already this year. I'll move to this one quickly, just to show the import jetty, which is more or less ready. And this jetty will have capacity to receive ships of the size that our ships will be, around 7,500 cubes. And for larger ships, we will be able to accommodate them as well in the second development phase, and I'll show you what that looks like in a while. And here just to show you that it's not only what we're doing in Øygarden that is important to us. Also, we have fabrication going on in many different yards. This case in Spain, where the storage tanks are being built right now, and also a couple of yards in Norway, and the pipelines are being put together and built in Italy. We are now in the first development phase, which is supported by the Norwegian government, and we have 2 initial customers as part of the Longship project, and the additional capacity for commercial customers as well in the first phase. And then in the second development phase, it says 5 million tons here, but it's 5 to 7 actually. So yet to be determined exactly what the pipeline capacity will be, but estimated to be between 5 and 7. So that's something that we will know more about quite soon. And this is what the expansion scope looks like. The expansion of the site in the second development phase is supported by the Connecting Europe facility scheme in the European Union. And you will see the second jetty that will be part of the scope for the phase 2, which will be able to receive larger ships. Then on the transportation challenge itself. So we heard already from Lina that storage capacity is unevenly distributed across Europe. And for that reason, we need CO2 transportation. You will see here on the slide that there is significant storage capacity available, in particular in the United Kingdom and Norway. There is also storage capacity elsewhere. And by the way, some of these figures may be questioned. For example, estimates from the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate is significantly higher than what is on this slide. This is just an illustration of some of the projections that have been made, and I think it's also higher, for example, in Denmark and also in the UK, which is good news. But those are theoretical projections. Obviously, the storage capacity need to be developed, but it illustrates the mismatch between emissions, large point emission sources, and where the storage capacity is located. This illustrates what a shipping network could look like from 2030. There will be several storage operators. There will be ship transportation from a number of different emission sources across Europe. And you will also see that in the case of Northern Lights that I represent, the transport distance to some of our neighboring countries is significantly longer than going to Central Europe. So Finland, Sweden, for example, and compared to France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. But we believe that there is a significant need for CO2 ship-based services in Europe, and we see that already now. There are a number of emitters that are looking at capturing CO2 from their industrial processes and facilities that we are talking to already, but we also heard recently from the European Commission that there are a very high number of industrial facilities that have and companies that have applied for support through the EU Innovation Fund, but there are relatively few storage operators that are looking to expanding their storage capacity. So there is a need for additional storage capacity. There is a need for transportation infrastructure as well. We are building 2 ships, but obviously we need many more. Just for Northern Lights, we estimate if we expand with the second development phase, we need another 9 ships. And they may be larger than the ones that we are currently building. These are 7,500 cubes. We are looking at significantly larger ships as well, but no decision has been made with regard to what we're going to go for. It obviously kind of hang together with decisions also made by emitters in investment in CO2 capture and where they're located, what their specific needs are going to be. This, by the way, is a relatively accurate illustration of what our ships are going to look like, and you see that they've got rotor cells, and this is also the color scheme that we are going to implement and use on our ships. So shipping regulations are well established, both through the International Maritime Organization. There are ISO standards for liquefied gas transportation, which would also be applicable for CO2 transportation. And all of these either explicitly cover CO2 transport or can do so with minor changes. Now, the opportunity globally is significant. I haven't looked at what the opportunity is specifically for Europe. It's we haven't found any good studies on that, but probably if we did a little bit more of the digging, then we could find it. But 10 gigatons of CO2 need to be captured and stored globally by 2070. And in Europe, the large industrial installations emit over 1.3 gigatons, and seaborne trade is estimated to be around 11 gigatons per annum. So a new CO2 shipping segment is in the making. It will be needed, and not only for Europe, but particularly also for Asia. And there is significant interest in Asia around what we are working on right now. And we believe that we need recognition and support also in Europe in order to kind of develop capacity to take the emissions that will need to be captured over the next decade. So that's what I wanted to cover. Thanks a lot, and happy to take any questions later.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was clear. We will come back to you with questions later on when we have the general Q&A session. So we are going from storage to transport fully, and for the next speaker, so shipping, efficiently closing the urgent CCS infrastructure gap. So Fred, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will try to share my screen. So my name is Fred Selhorst. I work for Victrol and I'm doing business development. So I will give a small introduction of who we are. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So who we are a Belgium-based shipping company, 100% family-owned, established in '69 of last century, and we have 2 offices, one in Antwerp and a second one in Breda, the Netherlands. So what do? We are mainly active in the transportation of mineral oil and gas. So we are a logistics service provider to energy markets on different aspects. We operate about 50 ships today, mainly distributing and bunkering fossil fuels to seagoing ships and to intermediate storage terminals and refineries. And our first path towards climate neutral activity was the introduction of our first LNG barge, LNG London, in 2014. And since then, we've been doing more than 500 ship-to-ships transfers. Seeing the experience that we built up there, it was a logic step for us to investigate the shipment and the transfer of CO2 as well. So how do we see the future of shipping? For our fleet, of course, we are fossil fueled. That means that we need to look into clean energy for the future, but also carbon capture on board of our ships could be a very good solution for the future. And on the market that we are developing, we do the same. So we look into alternative energy to be transshipped for our customers, meaning that it could be methanol, green hydrogen, ammonia, whatever there will be in the future. And of course, CO2 as a very important market for us in the shipping world. How we want to enter new markets, we connect to companies that are aligned in terms of green fuels and CCS. We cluster ideas and we try to have partnerships in place to have full value chain solutions, because that is quite important in an early stage as we are in today. So quickly about LNG London. With the LNG London, we've set new standards. LNG being a cryogenic gas, of course, minus 160 degrees, and therefore we have installed the highest safety standards. So with the introduction of LNG in the market, together with the stakeholders active in LNG operations, we are successful in safely bunkering LNG to our customers, to our seagoing vessels. And with those regulations and guidelines, we are ready and we are convinced that we can do the same transshipments for CO2 as well. So shipping of CO2, how would that look like? Why are barges quite suitable to connect in this CCS network? Barges are able to connect in an efficient way. We can sail on inland rivers, of course, and canals. We are competitive compared to other transport modes. We have a track record on oil and gas industries, of course, and here we can create, as the previous speaker said, we can create a new market being the CO2 shipment market. Very important for the early movers is that shipping has a short lead time. So within 26 months after FID or contract signing, if you want, we can have barges installed, and the same would be there for seagoing ships, meaning that for our perspective, we could be operational as of 2025 already. A very big beneficial point of barging and shipping is that it can be scaled up. So you can install other ships, you can dimension them so they are built to purpose. You have, of course, restrictions of the inland waterways, so we can dimension ships in terms of the restrictions of the waterways towards the emitters' plans. And therefore, we think that barges can efficiently close the urgent CCS infrastructure gap. So we've been working since 2019 on CCS and how we have been contributing. Well, we are trying to create the awareness of the potential of shipping, as the previous speakers already said. We need to create this awareness and we need to have this market in place. And to help our customers or the potential customers with how shipping could look like, we'll help them on all the aspects of shipping, like cargo handling, safety guidelines with the experience that we had from LNG, of course. We help them out with technical advice on manifolds, etc., connections, jetties, wherever we can be of assistance with the experience that we have from the conventional markets that we operate. Of course, a very important topic as well for CCS shipping would be the logistic footprint. And therefore, we investigate there how we can be most suitably shipping our goods as CO2 with green energy or with carbon capture on board of our ships. Last month, we have entered into a partnership with DanUnity, and DanUnity is a Danish joint venture between Evergas and Navigator Gas, and they focus on seaborne transportation of CO2, there where we are focusing on the hinterland of CO2. So what we are trying to do here is to offer complementary services from the emitters plant in the hinterland over the European canals and rivers. We go to the seagoing hubs, and there the ships of DanUnity can pick it up and bring it via open seas to the sequestration facilities, wherever they would be, not only Europe, of course, but if it's economically viable, they can sail wherever they want. So here is a map of Northwest Europe, and in yellow you see the main hinterland waterways, canals and rivers, with of course the Rhine, very important, but also in Belgium, the Netherlands, and other rivers in Germany. So you see that with inland barges, we can connect to the seagoing hubs like Rotterdam, Antwerp, Dunkirk, or Hamburg, if you want, and therefore it's the inverse way of shipping goods. Today we ship our goods from the seagoing hubs, the main ports, towards, let's say, the Rhine area, and here we could go the inverse way back to the seagoing hubs, and with a ship-to-ship transfer we could deliver it to other ships that can go to the sequestration facilities. So CCS, how ready are we today, and what would be then the conclusions? So today we are convinced that we can ship it in a safe way. We are technically feasible to do so with the experience that we have with LNG. Of course, very important there are the safety standards for shipping, and there a lot of steps were made with the introduction of LNG to the shipping market. Another aspect very important is that CO2 shipping is already included in ADN, and ADN is the regulatory for the transportation of dangerous goods over inland waterways. So it's already included in the legislation for barging, and that is quite important, of course. So As we have a proven track record on oil and gas in conventional markets, we are quite convinced that we can be of value to this CO2 market as well. And of course, very important, there is an enormous willingness and an appetite to act today. What is less ready? Yeah, we need industrial FIDs, so we need each other, and that is more or less the partnership that we want to see between the stakeholders. If a company, an emitter, can have an FID, then a design fine-tuning of the barges can be done, a class verification of the ships can be done, and we can go into depth about the contractual conditions for the rental, let's say, of the ships. Another difficult point is the financial schemes. Today, investing in shipping is seen as risk capital, and for sure for CO2, as this market is not existing today, it is seen as risk capital. So we need to move forward there to have right funding schemes and right investment schemes for potential investors. And another aspect, quite important, and the previous speaker said it already, it's a new market, so there will be new ships, meaning that we need to promote inland and shipping for crewing. We need to promote this on a European scale. And of course, IWT NAIADES is already working on that, but I think we can take more steps there. And to conclude with the red dot, that is not really how we want to see things, but there is an enormous commercial risk today. We need long-term commitments with the industrial emitters, but also with storage facilities. So end-to-end agreements will need to be in place in order to avoid stranded assets, because no investor is willing to invest for the short term when it's not refunded afterwards. So as there are no funding mechanisms for shipping in the CO2 market, the investments are quite high for the one who is investing. And of course, another aspect, already touched it, the importance of using green fuels in the future. There is today no commercial acceptance of the supplementary fuel cost for green energy. So we need to look into that, how we can roll out efficient green use in the future. On the regulatory aspects, as said before, the shipping of CO2 is already permitted, but with ADN, I mean. But for the CCS itself, there is no regulatory framework today. So we are quite convinced that governments can facilitate and speed up the process. For instance, London Protocol, 10T, the EU ETS, all those mechanisms can help to elaborate this market. And the last topic is the time frame. When will all the signs be green? When can emitters start to form this new market? So to conclude, we are quite convinced that CCS solutions and investments will need to be end-to-end in partnerships, aligning all the stakeholders. And there is an urgent need for partnerships, regulatory frameworks, and well-balanced investment regimes to get started in this very promising CO2 CCS market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred, for that. We are a little bit behind schedule, so I would like to ask the following speakers to keep to your time. We will go from transport over to emitter, and we will hear from a forerunner on carbon capture. So the status of CCS in the EU and transport modalities for CO2. Winston, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me? I will also share my slides. Perfect. I hope that works. So yes, thanks first of all for organizing this event and the discussion. I think it's absolutely great to have the whole value chain of CCS present. And since there's quite some expertise on CO2 transportation and a lot has been said already, I will focus a bit more why CCS and CO2 transport is so important for our sector. As you probably know, Heidelberg Cement is one of the largest global provider of construction materials, actually the biggest producer of cement in Europe. So we are producing cement and aggregates, which are the two main ingredients to produce concrete. When it comes to CO2, we have quite a high ambition with our roadmap. In fact, we were the first cement company worldwide to have a science-based approved target for 2030. And we also aim to offer all our customers carbon neutral concrete by 2050. But of course, in order to achieve this ambition, we really need to look at all technologies which exist. And as some of you know already, I mean, 2/3 of our emissions are process emissions. So we also really need to develop CCUS at a large scale in order to achieve our ambition. And that's why this technology is so important for our sector. Now, so we want to pioneer that technology worldwide and scale it up and implement it. We have a number of CCS projects ongoing around the globe, and we are primarily looking at 3 different capturing technologies, and we believe that this will allow us to bring down the costs of that technology while really also mastering it and adapting it to the different local conditions. Just last year, I think in autumn, we announced the ambition to remove 10 million tons of CO2 through CCS by 2030. I will not go through all these projects in detail, but maybe just to mention a few. I mean, we have Brevik in Norway, which will actually be the world's first industrial scale CCS project at the cement production, already operational by 2024. So here really construction is on track and very much well progressed. And the aim is to permanently store 400,000 tons of CO2 per year, which is about 50% of the plant's annual emissions. And the plant is actually ideally located at the seaside. So this is also done in cooperation with the Longship project, which was already mentioned by Kim earlier. We also have our project at our plant in Slite in Sweden, which should become the first CO2 neutral cement plant in the world by 2030. Here, actually, we want to capture all of its emissions, which is 1.8 million tons of CO2 per year. And both of these projects, by the way, have also a high biomass content. And apart from that, we are also developing technical demonstrators for capturing CO2 via oxyfuel and the lilac technologies, for example, in Germany and Belgium. And I think it's also good to mention that we are looking at several projects in Eastern Europe, including our Access project, which has been announced last year. It's part of our Gorace plant, which is the biggest cement plant in Europe, and that, for example, is 1,000 kilometers away from the sea. So here also we really need to find some CO2 transport solutions. And we are also looking at additional CO2 projects in Eastern Europe, which are on track and should be operational even before 2030. And here we are looking at the transport options as we speak. So for all these projects, we need transport solutions, be it either pipelines, ships, or also rail. So it's very clear that we can develop these projects, but we cannot fully implement them by ourselves. So we really need to work in a project consortium, and we need to have the infrastructure ready in the member states as soon as these CCS projects come into operation. We can already see that it starts with carbon capture at plants which are close to seaports, such as Antwerp, Rotterdam, or our Brevik project. And there are also a few inland projects that would ship the CO2 via barges on inland waterways. And this in the medium term would then be complemented by local backbone infrastructure in regions where we have industrial clusters, but where not all plants are maybe closely connected to the river sites. And of course, in the long-term high deployment scenarios, we may have even pipelines which are fully interconnected. But I think it's very important to say that in all the scenarios, we need a mix of the solutions. There will always be plants which are remote, where we need to have ship or rail solutions. And we also believe that there's such a high demand for these types of CO2 transport that they will never be stranded assets going forward. So it's very important that we work together to really have a full coverage if we want to achieve climate neutrality for our sector. And maybe on the last slide, just to say a few things which has been said also before. I mean, a lot of these projects, the CCS projects, have a lead time of 6 to 8 years to be fully implemented. But in order to achieve our 2030 target, that means that we really need to develop them now. And we also need to look at having a CO2 transport network across Europe to make sure that all the plants where we have CCS projects can be connected to a storage site. And for that, we need to have the necessary regulation. We need to have the skills at the regulatory side, and we need to have the transport capacity available. I think I stop here and leave the rest then for the questions.
Thank you very much, Winston. Very clear. So we will move on to the last speaker, and we started with an environmental NGO, and we will finish with one as well. So CO2 transport and storage from a legal or EU legislation point of view, and looking closer into the revision of 10T. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Per-Olof, and thank you so much to my fellow speakers and, of course, our partners at Bellona, Lina, and Rebecca, who've done everything to make this event happen today. Clean Air Task Force is also an environmental organization. We're focusing globally on advancing carbon capture and storage, as well as technology, permanent carbon removal solutions in a responsible manner to achieve net zero emissions. So a lot has been said already, so I'll just go over a few slides here that I think are relevant, and then to sum up. Of course, we need, I think Winston just touched on this, we need as many technologies as possible to achieve net zero emissions. We need technology options. That was also made clear by the IPCC report, because we will need to have different technologies for different local, regional, economic, and political and natural resource circumstances. So carbon capture and storage technologies are one of these solutions. And the CO2 transport and storage, I think, just to sum up, what we really need to do is we need to understand today what kind of CO2 transport and storage infrastructure we need to achieve net zero emissions in Europe, and we need to plan and invest today. This will help us reduce the overall cost of mitigation and will also help us achieve economies of scale. Just on this slide, I think the most important key takeaway is that the EU Innovation Fund, as we learned earlier, has already selected multiple projects that involve non-pipeline modalities. So it's really, really important to kind of fill the gaps of EU policy and legislation to ensure that we can enable many, many different industrial facilities to access carbon capture and storage as a solution. And we'll go over this in a second. Just from our analysis, I wanted to give a quick overview of why we need this policy and political support. So 10E, which was voted on yesterday finally and passed with 410 to 146 votes with 72 abstention, gives us political support. But what we now need is, of course, access to funding. And Europe has, as this analysis, which we undertook together with Carbon Limits, shows Europe has access to more than 400 gigatons of theoretical CO2 storage capacity. But to unlock this, we need to invest in CO2 storage development today. It will be, it takes about 10 years to enable CO2 storage development of a site. So there will be about 50% less storage than demand if we don't invest in that today. But then also for funding, we need for CO2 capture, transport, and storage funding. If we don't put in place the right mechanisms, the right policies today, there will be a shortfall of about $10 billion billion euros from break even by 2030 if we don't put in place the right policy today. So 10T is a critical piece in that policy puzzle. Also, this is a sneak preview of a forthcoming interactive tool that will be available on the Clean Air Task Force's website, which will show, and might be a little bit small on everyone's screen, but it will show the different costs of CO2 transport and storage for different industrial clusters, and based on the near-term availability of the storage sites, but also how, depends, of course, will show how will show, of course, how difficult it is to really enable adequate CO2 transport and storage solutions. So we're really excited for this tool, which will further inform this conversation about why 10T is such an important piece in the puzzle. So we already talked about the 10E revision that was finally approved yesterday. But of course, only pipelines still have access to funding and policy support. So this is where, just to close out this conversation and leave some room for questions, the 10T regulation will come in, as of course it can, right now there's no sign whatsoever in the proposed revision to include multiple modalities of transporting CO2. So aligning 10T and 10E will allow us to have designated 10T projects benefit from reduced organizational barriers, and of course further financial assistance, which we showed in our analysis is so direly necessary to ensure that the multiple pieces that need to fall into place, as we learned today, to enable successful rollout of carbon capture and storage to really come to fruition. So the 10T is, of course, as the title of this event and this conversation said, if we don't get this revision right for carbon capture and storage, is a risk of missed opportunity to optimize the synergies and really have a comprehensive and coherent policy framework to enable carbon capture and storage deployment. And so we're, of course, as an environmental organization, requesting that carbon capture and storage or CO2 transport modalities are included in 10T, and this is an exciting opportunity to fill this gap. And I will just end on one note, and you might have heard this from multiple stakeholders that have spoken today, but what Europe really needs is a more comprehensive and more strategic perspective on deployment policy for carbon capture and storage deployment, or carbon capture and storage, or then technological direct air capture and storage deployment, so carbon management, that really takes into account the different policy gaps. 10T is one of those gaps, but helps us to deploy capture technologies, CO2 transport modalities, and enable CO2 storage development. So we just wanted to kind of go over how there is a really big picture frame and revision needed to enable the large-scale deployment of carbon capture and storage for a climate neutral Europe. So I'll stop here. This was a little bit of a whirlwind. We're happy to make those slides available afterwards, but I did want to leave some time for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. And I would like to welcome all of the speakers to the floor. We have a couple of minutes to use. So please turn your cameras on, and we will have a background slide as well. So all of you, thank you very, very much. We've heard so many background descriptions, so many proposals, and it's amazingly interesting to listen to. And I wouldn't like to go into details, but I would like to ask you, so now we have people here who have listened to what you have said, but how can we, maybe that is the only thing we haven't really talked about here, how can we create further awareness? So this is something that is known in a broader perspective, how important this is for actually totally important in order for Europe to reach climate neutrality. So I would really like to ask the panel that. So any kind of input is welcome. Anyone would like to start?
Yeah, I can add something to your question. I think that the lead times and the time frame is quite important. So if for the early movers, if we want to act, we need to act now. And ships, if ships is the solution, or trucks or train or pipeline, we need to act today. And we are convinced that in 2025 ships will be operational if we can proceed today. And that is, of course, very important. I cannot speak for pipeline. I think that will last a bit longer, but let's see how things move forward as of today.
Thank you very much, Fred, and we'll go to Lee.
Yeah, just to double down on Fred's point, I think what's important, which was also touched on in Lina's presentation, we want political and policy support. So political recognition to ensure that there's a clear signal that carbon capture and storage technologies are part of the solution. So that's the inclusion, working towards the inclusion in existing and moving legislation and policies right now. And then we want a complete policy deployment policy framework that takes a step back as a carbon capture and storage strategy that then helps us identify the multiple gaps. So 10T serves political recognition in the short term and plug those gaps of policy, deployment policy in the long term.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lee. And I will go to Lina, but before we have a question here from the audience, and just to highlight what is really the difference regarding the funding on 10E and 10T and the EU ETS. I could ask any one of you, but since Lina has raised her hand, maybe you can fill in a little bit on this as well.
Yes, it relates slightly to the point I wanted to make as well, because the point I want to make is the importance of when we know that there is interest and we know that there is developments on the ground, we really need to make sure that we are optimizing it and sending the positive market signals to really reduce this investor risk that I spoke of. And this is also, we need to identify that we cannot afford any opportunity costs on the way to net zero. And that is really what this would be. If there are market actors sitting there ready to do these investments, but are concerned if the EU is serious about its industrial decarbonisation agenda. So I think that's an important point to make. And I think that especially when we are talking about the 10T and why that is important, it is also the risk that if multiple transport modalities are not included, but transport via pipelines are, this gap, the question that will arise is also, perhaps there is a reason for this amongst investors. And this is also something that we want to make sure. We want to highlight the importance of multiple transport modalities, but recognition is not everything. And the 10T offers through its PCI status administrative support, but also funding support, which is very crucial.
Very good. Thank you very much, Lina. Any further last words that you would like to highlight? You have described a lot, but anything? We have Kim.
Yeah, I think it cannot be stressed often enough, but by introducing the concept of CO2 shipping, CCS will be an option for all emitters with access to a jetty, and the kind of ship-based solution provides flexibility to reach at least 350 industrial emitters across Europe and maybe more. And they have a total CO2 emissions of around 300 million tons per year, and maybe even more. And I think that in itself illustrates the opportunity, and that need to be recognized.
Thank you very much, Kim. And final word from Winston.
Yes, thanks. I think we can support all the things. I mean, we need a regulatory framework which looks at the whole value chain for CCS. And of course, we need the funding, both CAPEX and also looking at the OPEX. What I think is also very important, and that was said before, is that we need harmonization and standards when it comes to the transport part. And I think one thing you said, Per, is on the awareness. I mean, we really need to raise the awareness of this technology and how it can be implemented. And I think we have a wealth of experience in the North Sea located countries, and that experience really also need to be brought to other countries where we look at CCS projects in, for example, the South and in Eastern Europe.
Thank you very much. I will finalize by highlighting 5 general pillars regarding what is needed for carbon capture to develop and to be used in Europe in the way we need it to. So first of all, an enabling policy framework that makes it economically feasible to invest in all parts of the CCUS value chain. coherent and coordinated funding programs, both in the EU level and national level, of course. Strong support for CCUS R&I through the Horizon Europe and partnerships. Political recognition for these technologies and for the CO2 infrastructure, very important. And finally, we need an EU strategy for CCS and CCU with a focus on the CO2 infrastructure. And with that, I would like to thank all the speakers. I would like to thank all of you who have joined today. And thank you very much for this. And if you have questions, please make connections to us. We will be happy to answer anything more, and we will follow up on questions not answered here. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you back soon again. Thank you. Bye.